If you ever would wonder how Jesus' teaching would provoke the scribes and the Pharisees or would stir up the crowds, just listen to some of the things that he just said. Again, I remind you, in St. Matthew's Gospel, Jesus is the new lawgiver. He's the new Moses. Just as Moses went up the mountain, received the commandments from God, and presented them to the people, Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount is on the mountain and now presenting his teaching to the people. Notice what he says. Make no mistake about it. You cannot say these kind of things unless you are divine, unless you have a divine authority behind you. You have heard it said, do not kill, you shall not kill, a commandment of God handed on through Moses. But I say to you. Now, was he trying to abolish those commandments? He told us no. He didn't come to abolish the law or the prophets. Now he is showing us how they are fulfilled, how he is able to teach us, perhaps to get beyond just the letter of the law, to understand what is behind it. What's the deeper root of the problem or the sin? So you've heard it said, do not kill. But now I say to you, don't grow angry at your brother. You know, whoever calls his brother Racha or you fool will be liable to fiery Gehenna. Make no mistake about it. He paints a picture for people so that they would understand clearly what he was saying. If you don't know what Gehenna was, it was outside the city of Jerusalem. There was a valley called the Hinnom Valley. In that valley, it became a trash dump. They'd take the trash from the city, put it out there, and it would burn constantly, day and night. So if you looked out from the city, what would you see? These flames coming up. It's a trash dump. Burning trash dump. And that's what he's telling. He's warning. You want to know where we get the image of hell as the fires of hell? Well, there's a pretty good image from the Master himself. 3 times in the scripture I read today does he mention Gehenna. So he's warning people, get to the root of the problem. It's growing angry. It winds up with the result sometimes, anger, jealousy, all these things can wind up with murder as the end product. But he's warning them, get to the root. Find out what the cause is and eliminate that. Settle with your opponent quickly on the way to court. Get it reconciled first so that it doesn't lead to something further. Same thing with the next commandment that he brings up. You shall not commit adultery, the 6th commandment. We're familiar with it. The people would have been familiar with it. Yet I say this to you, getting at the root of the problem. Don't look lustfully. Lust, that impure desire for somebody else, the physical thing, that may lead to the wanting, the coveting of someone else, objectifying that person. Don't do that. Remember, every person's in the image and likeness of God. And then we're not supposed to objectify them in a impure or sexual manner. So he's getting at the root cause. This will lead to problems if you don't control what you have going on inside. Because the truth behind it all is that the truly human act is the act of the will. I learned that a long time ago in morality class or ethics class. What makes you human? You make choices. That's what the first reading was telling us from Sirach. God has set before you choices, set before you fire and water, whatever which one you choose. Stretch forth your hand. Before man are life and death, good and evil. We know we have free will. We know we make choices. That's what makes us human. And so that we have to think about that. When we talk about sin, especially serious sin, if you remember from a catechism class or somewhere where we learned it, you need 3 things for serious sin. Sufficient reflection, you think about it. It has to be grave matter, something that's very important, and you choose to do it anyway. Free consent of the will. That's what makes something wrong. I know it's wrong, and yet I choose it anyway. That's the problem. So it's always the free will. And what does it say? No one does he command to act unjustly. God doesn't do that. And none does he give license to sin. We don't have permission to sin from God. We have to be obedient to God. And I said, why do we keep the commandments? Does it make God any better or any holier? God becomes more God because of him giving us commandments? No, it's to help us. Jesus didn't eliminate the law. He explained it. This is why it exists. To better you, to help you, so that you don't go astray, so you don't commit something grave, something disordered in God's view. That's the point of it all. Get to the root of the problem. You have to keep God's commandments because they help us. They guide us. They tell us what if we get out of line, go out of the boundaries that God has set up, his design, then we're going to have problems. We're going to be the ones who suffer. As he goes on, he talks about divorce here and giving a bill of divorce. Moses did that, he says, not here, but in another passage, because of the hardness of the heart of the people. Moses probably got worn down. That's the implication, that the people, he gave them and allowed them to do that. But now what does he say? I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, unless the marriage is unlawful, causes her to commit adultery. So we have to think about that in the seriousness of making promises and commitments to someone. We have to take it seriously. As an aside, today is World Marriage Day. We celebrate World Marriage Day today. And we should honor that covenant of marriage. It's a sacred commitment. It's a vow that's taken between a husband and a wife. And when all this confusion exists out in the world, redefining marriage, or even redefining what a human being is, we have to go back to what did God intend. Go back to Genesis. It's very clear there. God created them. He created them male and female. He gave them the ability to make choices. He told them, be fruitful and multiply. And then he said, the two shall become one flesh. Jesus reiterated that whole fact. The two become one. For what purpose, right? Start a family so that they can be fruitful and multiply. All of that is divinely established. So we can't write that off or redesign it in our own liking, but it's designed by God. So when we don't listen to God, in effect, we're rebelling against his plan. We're rebelling against what he has set up to do. So he warns us, be very careful about the commitments that you make. He reiterates it with the next thing about taking an oath. Don't swear, by God or God's throne or heaven or earth or by your head or whatever. Making a solemn promise or a vow, keep in mind, is important to God. We make vows sometimes. And a marriage commitment is the one you're probably most familiar with, the idea of a covenant. Now, if I go back into the ancient idea of a covenant or making a promise, a covenant is an exchange of two people. I will be your God, you will be my people. That was the first covenant. God exchanged himself with us. I'm yours and you're mine, to the Israelites. That was the first covenant. But other covenants were made subsequently between different parties, different people. There's an exchange. You know how they sealed the covenant? Remind you of this. They'd often slaughter an animal. And that animal would be split into two parts. And the parties involved would go through the middle of the animal that was now split. And what's the implication of that? Even the blood was sprinkled on the people to remind them, the parties involved. It was to remind them, if I don't keep my part of the bargain, may what happened to that animal happen to me. May what happened to that animal happen to me. That's why they walked through that split animal. Think of that. The implications there. The promise before God. If I don't keep my promise, may that happen to me. Now, let's bring this fast forward a little bit for a moment to the Eucharist. Where do we hear that word covenant over and over and over again in the Mass? When we repeat Jesus' words. This is the blood of the new and the eternal covenant. What he says is making a covenant. Remember, it's a serious pact or agreement. It's a vow. He's vowing himself on our behalf. So what's our response called to be? When he says, do this in memory of me, he's not joking. We have to do this. Do this. Be here at Mass. That's keeping our part of the covenant. We need to be reminded of what he did for us, and we have to be faithful to him. That's so important. And we've lost that sense in our church, and the sense that we owe something to God. We owe him our worship. He did his part of the bargain. He kept his part of the covenant. He did this for us and for our salvation. He took upon himself our sins. Our response needs to be, I'm going to be faithful to him. I'm going to listen to Jesus' words. I'm going to have them change my life in the right direction. Because the consequences are serious. It was sealed not in the blood of an animal. It was sealed on the cross in his blood. You see how that works? His blood he gave for us. So he expects us to live in similar manner. So God so loved the world that he gave his son. His son died for us. And then he taught us there's no greater love than to lay down your life for your friends. That's what he expects from us. Sacrificial love. That's what he expects in husband and wife relationships. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. How much did he love the church? He died for it. You see, he wants a commitment. He wants a commitment from us. And us to keep our commitments, our vows. You know, say yes, let your yes mean yes and your no mean no. Anything more is from the evil one. And for those who want to poo-poo that Christ didn't and wasn't aware of the evil one, Satan, very much aware. Does Satan exist? You know, sometimes the people try to write that off and say, oh, no, it's, you know, it's evil. Just, you know, no, it's the person. There was an evil, you know, angel, a good angel who became evil, I should say. You know, and he brought a whole lot with him. Brought a whole lot down. Christ is very much aware, you know, of the evil one at work in our world. So pay attention to the scriptures and what God is saying. There's so many beautiful things. But I don't want to leave you without hope. Because the second reading so beautifully from St. Paul to the Corinthians tells us about a mysterious wisdom that God gives us all. A mysterious wisdom. And that wisdom points to something beyond what we can even imagine. Eye has not seen, ear has not heard, nor has it even dawned upon the heart of man what God has prepared for those who love him. He expects us to love him. And he has prepared a place for us if we follow his commandments. You can't say you love God if you don't keep his commandments. Jesus said the commandments are important. Keeping the law, he's not abolishing it. He's fulfilling it. It's fulfilled in his person. So there's the mystery behind the readings today. Live your life in communion with God, union with his commandments. Live your life in such a way that you're fulfilling your part of the bargain, your part of the covenant, which he established as an eternal, a forever covenant. There is no more covenants being made between God and us. The final, definitive one is the one on the cross when he died for us. That's the covenant, the blood poured out for us, which in a few seconds we're going to be reminded of at this Holy Eucharist. Think of the implications of what we say and do. The truly human act is the act of the will. What am I thinking? What am I saying? What am I willing to do? What's my motivation? How am I living my life? get to the root of problems and realize that's where they start. Jesus is telling us, he's teaching us all these things. May we be grateful that we have his guidance. May we be faithful to him and to the law. May God bless you.